Welcome back to the Voice on College Football here with Penn State. Here to recap another gut-wrenching loss for the Nittany Lions. I am Marty Leap with Black Shoe Diaries. My normal co-host, Tim Aiden, is currently walking out of Beaver Stadium, so he's not here today, but making what I believe is now your second or third appearance of the season. Also from Black Shoe Diaries, Ellie Moretta Feliz is back. Fourth appearance. I'm wrong. I know you've been here a few times, but so Ellie Moretta Feliz is with us today. We're here to recap what was another heartbreaking loss for the Nittany Lions. Been far too many of them lately, but first and foremost, how are you doing?
I was doing better about 3 hours ago.
I mean, I was doing better like 10 minutes ago and 3 hours ago, and it looked like they were going to find a way to pull it out. But no, yeah, for those who I'm sure most of you out there watched it, or if you're watching the replay of this later in the day on Saturday or maybe Sunday morning and did not, with what was it, about 6 minutes ago, the Nittany Lions recovered a fumble, kicked the field goal, took a lead, and in a game where they repeatedly shot themselves in the foot. It looked like they were still going to find a way to pull it out, only for Michigan to go down and take a late lead and win it 21-17. I think the main starting point for this one, anyone who watched this game would probably agree, that fake field goal attempt on Penn State's second drive of the game, leading 3-0 at the time. They have a 4th and goal from the Michigan 2-yard line. They lined up to kick a field goal, which I wasn't a huge fan of kicking the field goal there. I would have just gone for it. And the Nittany Lions wound up faking the field goal on a fake play that nearly resulted in a touchdown the other way for Michigan. So needless to say, it was a just all-around disaster for them. My opinion is there, if you're going to go for it, just line up and go for it. You only need 2 yards. I know for the most part the running game has struggled this year, but as we will get into as the show goes on, the running game was actually pretty half decent today. Kevon Lee averaged 4.5 yards a carry. John Lovett averaged over 4 yards a carry. So they actually ran the ball decently well today, especially for their standards. But that fake field goal definitely came back to bite them. If you're not going to go for it there, just take the points. They did neither. And in a 4-point loss, every little thing like that matters. So what is your take on that whole, just everything that unfolded there, from lining up to go for it to faking it and just the chaos that ensued?
I think I just said this in our private channel right before we went on, which is obviously the whole game counts, right? The fact that they were still up three with 6 minutes left after they basically imploded after the first quarter says a lot about the team. Um, but yeah, every little bit counts, and I think if I take the whole game into consideration, it's easy to see why the coaches decided to do that particular thing at that particular time. Because when they were about to, in their minds at least, score on a fake field goal try, they had been moving the ball almost at will, and Michigan had done nothing. So if you're thinking that this is how the game is about to go, not scoring in that particular moment doesn't hurt you that much. That said, right, if you're not going to score, I would prefer that you don't score because you tried to go for it on fourth down and didn't gain the requisite 2 yards to get it in. Because at that point, at the very least, Michigan has to drive 98 yards to score. Anything can happen. We can play the theory game all we want, but I would have much rather Michigan started that drive from their 2 yard line than from their 31 yard line or 32 yard line, wherever they started, because I think it ultimately ended up being a punt, right? And I mean, think about if you change nothing but the yardage, a punt from, like, say the 5 or 6 yard line versus a punt from almost the 40 yard line, like that makes a big difference in a game where a couple of yards ended up being the difference.
Yeah, it definitely would have been a huge difference. Actually, I looked just to make sure I was right. And that Michigan punt that came following that disaster was down at the 2 yard line. So Penn State started at their own 2. Like you said, there is a massive difference in field position there. And if you just go for it, you don't get it. Michigan's backed up. And let's say even if they they wind up going 3 and out on that drive, but let's say even if they get a first down or two and punt it, you're still going to have much better field position. And like you said, the way they were moving the ball early in the game, there's reason to believe they could have went down the field there and got back in a position to score again. I mean, even on that ensuing drive, when they started at their own 2-yard line, they moved the ball some before the drive came to an end. So like they were moving it well. They wound up gaining 30 yards on that drive for him to punt it away. So if you start a drive at your own 40, midfield, somewhere in there, and get 30 yards, you're in field goal range. And again, like you said, in a game this close, every couple of yards, every point makes a difference. And that's what we saw today. You know, ultimately, the biggest difference in this game was probably the fact Penn State failed to finish drives and Michigan did. The Nittany Lions kicked 3 field goals, missed a field goal, and scored a touchdown. Michigan scored 3 touchdowns. In a game this close, the touchdowns are going to win. I mean, they took care of the ball. The only turnover was by Michigan, and yet, I mean, I guess that disaster fake field goal actually was technically a fumble, but the only like true turnover was the Michigan fumble that looked like it was going to cost them the game. And just it came down. Penn State failed to finish drives with Michigan. To their credit, when they were in position to score, they finished the drive and they got 7.
Indeed, and there's so in games in games like these, right, where it's so close, things go in such a way. There are so many different ways in which a game could turn out, right? If we go back to that decision, even if Penn State just chooses to kick the field goal to go up 6-0, right? And then they kick another field goal later on to go up 9-7, for example. Like Michigan's entire strategy then changes too, right? If Penn State gets the touchdown there to go up 10-0, now Michigan isn't going to be running the ball as much as they would have liked, or even as much as they did, right? Like they only ran for 144 yards, which, you know, when they've been averaging over 200, that's still a testament to what Penn State did. But if they have to run the ball a little less because now they're playing catch up, that still puts Penn State at an advantage. And even when they started not doing as well, that's still just the mentality of what Michigan needs to do merely to catch up makes that much of a difference. And of course, you know, I'm sure the coaches are going to watch that film and just look at every single time where the smallest decision could have turned the tides. But it's unfortunate that we are sitting here after a game that was close throughout, and it just, you can't help but think about that one decision. And they had the whole game to recover from it, and they basically did, right? They were up 17-14 with 5:45-ish left in the game. All they had to do was stop Michigan. And of course, Michigan had no big plays to that point in the game. And the one big play that they got is the one that basically sealed the game for them. So it's again, like I at the expense of repeating myself here, right? It's hard to not focus on that one decision, because that one decision is what ultimately may have been the difference in the game, both from the standpoint of how the game played out and what the score ultimately ended up being. There's a difference between, you know, a 24-21 potentially, right, score, or even just Penn State being up by more than 3 points in the second quarter, making Michigan have to play differently. Because on the other side of that coin, right, like Michigan running the ball is their strength. Sure, they're well below their average right now. But if Michigan had to throw the ball, much more than they had to run it because they're basically running out of time, that plays into Penn State's favor. So it's a tough loss to swallow. And ultimately, I would hope Penn State will learn from this and not get so cute when games are on the line, or at least when points are on the line. But that didn't happen today, and this is what we got.
Yeah, and it's like they had that fake punt on their first drive, which worked out. And honestly, I did not mind that call at all. I thought Michigan was onto something because they came out line up the punt. Harbaugh caught a timeout immediately, and then Penn State came out, and I half expected at that point Penn State just to put the offense out there on the field, but they stuck with it. And to James Franklin and special teams coordinator Joe Lorig and the staff's credit, they stuck with their plan and it worked. Jordan Stout floated a nice pass to Curtis Jacobs for an 18-yard gain and a first down. And, you have that work, maybe a little too overconfident on some of that stuff, and that contributes to your decision making. But I think the biggest point you made that I just completely agree with is it's not just that play potentially cost Penn State points. It changed the entire complex of the game. Like you said, if you can get up a little bit further on Michigan and negate that running game a little bit more, which, as you point out too, the defense for the most part kept Michigan's running game in check. Hassan Hoskins had a nice game. He ran for 156 yards, but he had 35 carries. So you carry the ball that many times, you're going to get your yards. Michigan only averaged 3.5 yards a carry, which is a really good job by the Penn State defense. It's one of the best rushing attacks, not just in the Big Ten, but the entire country with Michigan. So if you could have gotten those points or backed them up, they punt it short, and then you turn that into points, whatever it might have been, that just really seemed to change the complexion of the game early on where Penn State had full control. And, Ellie, as you pointed out, to their credit, they came back and were still in position to win this game and just couldn't finish it. And it's just, I can't help but keep feeling it just goes back to not finishing drives. So many times in this game, they were in position to get a touchdown and they wound up settling for a field goal, or to get a field goal and something goes wrong. There was the missed field goal. There was a couple sacks that forced them to punt. Just they left points on the field. And when you're playing a team who's ranked number 6 in the country and it's a 4-point final score, those 6 to 10 points they left on the field proved to be costly. And I think more than anything, that's what burnt Penn State today, was just leaving those points on the field. And I think what's so frustrating for Penn State fans is going back to halftime of the Iowa game. This is what we've seen. We've seen the offense struggling. We've seen the offensive line, to their credit, as much of the offensive line struggled to run block. A lot of the season, the pass protection has been okay. Today, and now again, Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo might be the best pass rush combination in the conference. But today, the offensive line, especially those tackles, just got eaten alive. Their Penn State's opening drive, 3rd and goal from the 9. Cliff has Dotson for an easy touchdown, but he just didn't have time to throw it because Michigan completely ate Penn State's offense line alive. John Lovett, the running back, misread a delayed blitz, and that kind of threw the pass protection off. So it's the repeated mistakes, I think, have become so frustrating. And obviously this late in the season, it's tough to fix things, but it's frustrating to see them be this far along and still be struggling with pass protection, still be struggling with generating a run game, struggling with finishing drives.
Yeah, and it's funny because they got 109 yards in this game, which is right about their average, right? But still is the most they've gotten, I think, in a Big Ten game, period. And it's funny that it came against Michigan because they're very good at stopping the run. But even then, right, like we're talking about, there were so many drives that were 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 2. And if you had even slightly better of a running game, those are first downs instead of punts, right? Or those are first downs instead of 4th down tries. Those are drives that keep the ball away from Michigan, which is ultimately another thing that ended up happening in the end, right? Like Michigan was able to keep the ball away from Penn State by eating clock and I don't want to keep harping on this point, right? But like when you only have so many opportunities to put points on the board, you kind of have to take you have to take those opportunities. And I'm not even talking about, oh, you should have gone for the field goal or you should have gone for it, right? Like whatever decision you made, and you know, I can hear myself also saying that that was their decision. I just don't agree with it. But like there have been so many formations that they've shown over the course of the season with other players that would have been much better than the one they chose. And look, right, you can't. It's easy for us to question the coaches sitting here in our couches or I guess desks, right, watching how things unfolded. So I will acknowledge that to an extent, right? Because I saw what happened and I saw how it could have gone different, and you know we're having this discussion right now, and I you know I'm not a fan of saying they should have done X and Y, but like in this particular play, oh my gosh, like they had a an entire bag of different tricks they could have pulled that I just and look, I'm pretty sure there are at least 37 reporters right now asking James Franklin this exact same question as we speak, and we'll hear what he has to say. But I'm just so dumbfounded that I can't really think of anything else at the moment.
Yeah, and I think a big thing there too, like you said, the running game. If you have more faith in it, more confidence in whatever it is, you just line up, run the ball there in 4th and 2. So that's a huge factor here also. But to stick with the running game, you know, like I said, they weren't as bad today as the box scores can make it seem. You know, if you take Kevon Lee, John Lovett, and Jahan Dotson, you combine their numbers, they ran for 111 yards. Cliff had 16 carries for 16 yards. However, he was sacked, I think, 6 or 7 times. So on designed runs and on QB scrambles, he probably rushed for 30 to 40 yards, just sacks. And then that Jordan Stout, that fake field goal, went as a minus 18-yard run for Stout. So the rushing game wasn't as bad as it's been. My biggest takeaway from that, honestly, was, you know, he left the game on Penn State's next to last possession. I think it was their next to last possession he left it, or it might have been the possession they scored the touchdown tied on. It was late in the 4th quarter. Kevon Lee left the game with some sort of injury, and he did not return. But my big takeaway is if Lee is healthy, he's got to be running back 1 right now, I feel. He came into the game averaging, I believe it was 5.1 yards per carry, I want to say, which, yes, 5.1 yards per carry, which was best on the team. He ran for 88 yards on Saturday and averaged 4.5 yards a carry against a very good Michigan defense. I know there's been the effort to get Noah Kane carries, John Lovett, Devin Ford at times just trying to get anything going. But I think at this point, these final 2 games into the bowl game, you've got to, assuming he's healthy, you've got to ride Kevon Lee as your top running back. And it's not just the production. He's the guy who will take the ball and fall forward. He's the guy who sometimes to his demise tries to bounce outside and tries to make a play. Like he is the guy who is not just been the most successful runner, but has also been the guy who I feel has run the hardest and things of that nature.
Yeah, he has already proven to me that he is the most reliable of all 3 runners. I like that they're trying to get John Lovett involved in the passing game. He dropped 1 too many for me this weekend. So why don't you give those touches to Lee? He's proven at this moment that he's going to get you at worst a couple of yards on every touch, right? He has gone from early in the season, as you pointed out. He tried to dance around too much, kind of very Saquon Barkley-esque, loss of yards on those scrambles. He has now worked in such a way that, sure, he'll try to scramble, but he'll only do so after he's already gained a couple of yards, right? He's going forward, he's getting you a couple of yards, and you know what? That's all you need. You don't need, and here's the thing, right? I'm about to say you don't need 12 yards on every possession or on every touch. But you know what? Kevon Lee is the only one who actually has given you 12 yards for any given point. So at this stage in the game, right? Like, sure, any goal beyond a bowl game at this point is out the window, right? But at the very least, you can still salvage some of what's left of the season, win 8 or 9 games, right? Kevon Lee is the guy who's going to give you the best opportunity to have some semblance of balance in the offense. And the coaching staff just needs to suck it up and tell the other guys that if they want more touches, they got to beat out the guy who's actually giving them production. It's like Kevon Lee has 88 yards in this game. The next person is John Lovett with 17. The third best person is your quarterback. Like, what are we doing here? Enough, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is Lee's position. This is Lee's job. Just give it to him and stop screwing around.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Make the other guys take it away from him at this point. To his credit, he's been the one back who has come the closest to come out and seizing this job this year and taking the bull by the horns. Make someone rip it away from him. I thought it was extremely telling. Noah Cain did not have a single touch today, and I don't think he was even in the game until after Lee got hurt. When Lee got injured, which I remember now was on that drive, Penn State tied the game because they went in that formation with the heavy backfield with Devin Ford and Noah Cain. And for both them, that was their first play of the game, and Cliff dumped it off to Tyler Warren. But for Noah Cain, and now with Noah Cain, I will preface this with he has really struggled this season more than anyone expected. That said, to me, he's never looked fully healthy. It sucks to say it because when healthy, the kid is so good. But I really do wonder if that foot injury last year just proves to be more than he can overcome. But like you said, you got to let Lee take the job right now. And, I thought during the broadcast today, one point Dan Orlovsky kept making, which I totally agree with, was, like you said, you don't need to be getting 12 yards every play. But what Penn State needs to avoid, and they've not been able to avoid very often this year, is you can't be losing 2 yards per carry. The running backs need to understand, and I feel like Lee is the back who's done this best. You know what? Sometimes if the hole isn't there, lowering your shoulder and getting 2 yards, especially on first down, you'll take that because that doesn't derail the entire drive. And, I feel like there's been times a lot of the backs haven't done that, and Lee's been the guy who's been the best at avoiding that. And sometimes just getting that 1 or 2 yard gain on first down to keep you from being behind the sticks for the rest of the drive can make all the difference in the world. And Lee's been the back who's done that this year.
Indeed. And if you have a drive where you have to go for it on fourth down, like they did in the last drive, right? You'd much rather go for it on 4th and 2 or 4th and 3 than 4th and 7, or I think it was 4th and 6 that they had to go for it in that last drive before Michigan basically ran out the clock. So we're getting to a point here now. With all that said, right, I don't expect next week to be that big of a challenge with Rutgers coming in, but still, like at this point, Lee is your most consistent back. You may have mentioned, right, we're speculating. We don't really know what the reality is, but we believe as a staff here that Noah Cain is probably not 100% and never really was. So that's why he doesn't really look the same. John Lovett, as useful as he has been, relatively speaking, so far, is still not what we would prefer. And let's be realistic. Some of it is on the offensive line,
Mm-hmm.
but Lee is still making something out of nothing with that same offensive line, right? Like everyone's playing with the same offensive line, but only one person is consistently giving you positive yardage.
Yeah, and I said this on the post-game show with Tim last week. I feel like a lot of the season, the struggles with running game has been a combination of the running backs and the offensive line. Last week, I thought it was more so the offensive line than the running backs. This week, like I said, overall, I thought things were okay. But like you said, Lee has been the guy when the offensive line has struggled, has been able to still get something done. He's still been able to go out and get you some yards. Like I said, he came into this game averaging 5 yards a carry, which was by far and away the best on the team. So I think you just need to ride him, And again, all this is if he's healthy, because we don't know right now. But if he is, he's got to be the guy. And, looking ahead to Rutgers next week, you've got to have some concerns on the injury front. Devon Ellie's by the end of the game looked like a robotic man. He had a brace on his knees, a brace on an elbow. The kid's been playing great this year at defensive tackle and just been super banged up. But especially on offense with Lee, their final drive, Cam Sullivan-Brown, who has had, I think, 4 catches all year, got multiple targets. Malik Mega, who came into the game with 1 catch, got a target, which to his credit he caught. And it seemed like Dotson may have been banged up on that drive on the 4th and whatever it was, 4th and 3, 4th and 4, I can't remember off the top of my head, that they failed to convert. Dotson was not on the field. So, if there are injuries there, that's obviously going to create an obstacle. But if there aren't injuries there, even before Dotson left the field, because Dotson was clearly banged up, one has to wonder why they were giving targets to these guys over Parker Washington. I understand Keandre Lambert-Smith had some drops today, but ultimately he's been a very good big play threat for you this season. And that was one thing that to me got frustrating on that last drive also, where it didn't seem like they were putting their best personnel out there at receiver. And like I said, once Dotson got banged up, he left the field totally different, obviously, but it was frustrating to me to not see them targeting Parker Washington or Keandre Lambert-Smith or maybe one of the tight ends on that final drive, because they've been your guys this year outside of Dotson.
Yeah, I mean, nothing against Sullivan-Brown, of course, but
yeah, obviously.
Your 2 most important plays of the game go to a guy that I believe has had 1 catch the entire season, or 2 catches maybe the entire season.
There haven't been.
Yeah, I'm not. And I get it. I get strategically maybe what they were thinking. Okay, everyone else, especially since Dotson is out, everyone else is going to be double, triple covered. So let's try to give it to the guy that no one is going to be paying attention to. But maybe there's a reason why no one's paying attention to the guy.
Yeah, I just Googled it. He entered the day with 4 catches this season, 17 for his career. And, like you said, the thing, nobody paying attention to him, I think that very much may have been the case, because there was that sideline route to Sullivan-Brown early in that drive where he was open and he just couldn't get to the ball. And, that's where it was frustrating with me, because if you run that with, say, Keandre Lambert-Smith, even with the drops he had today, I'm very confident he reels that in, because anyone who's watched his team this year can tell you one thing Keandre Lambert-Smith has done an excellent job of is in games when he's had drops, he's always bounced back with that big catch. He did it against Wisconsin. He did it against Ohio State. He did it in the Indiana game. There's been games all year where he has bounced back to make a crucial catch. Last week against Maryland, had a big first down catch after a drop earlier in the game. And, like you said, obviously the coaching staff had their reasons, and I'm sure those are things we may find out more about as the week goes on. But it was definitely frustrating to be out there on that last drive, knowing you had to go score to take the lead and win the game, and you were almost shorthanding yourself by not having some of your best weapons out there on the field.
Yeah, and I will say, right, like after last season, after how things went last season, having a bowl game guaranteed, I'm going to disrespect Rutgers here a little bit. Having a winning regular season is all well and good. And let's be realistic, right? Some of us predicted that they would finish in the 9-3, 8-4 range. That's still possible. I think one of us at the beginning of the season actually did predict a 7-5 season. So if they can't beat Michigan State at the end of the season, that 7-5 season happens. And that's progress, right? If you're coming off a losing season, avoiding a losing season is a good thing. It builds momentum for the next year. Penn State has a top 3 right now class coming in. So there's a lot of promise. It's always so tough to conceptualize the notion that we predicted something like this at the beginning of the season, then watching how things unfolded, being ranked as high as number 4 in the country, being 5-0, basically kind of the same thing that happened in this game, but instead against Iowa, like being able to move the ball at will, only for everything to come to a screeching halt. And let's be realistic, right? I think Clifford is doing pretty okay at the moment, but there are still some lingering effects from that hit that he took at Iowa.
Absolutely.
Every time he gets hit, he's basically, double down in pain. He's bent over, he's wincing, right? So, like, there is the possibility that Clifford is giving us everything he has got, but he's not particularly 100%. Even if it's at 90, but that's still not 100%. So that aside, right? Still watching such a promising season get derailed so quickly is still disappointing, even if at the end of the day, what we predicted at the beginning of the season is what ends up happening. Because let's be realistic, right? Like when there are no games being played, when we don't know how the team is going to reach what we say they will reach, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, they'll lose to this team, they'll lose to that team, they'll win that one, blah, 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 and all will be well. But then you actually see it happen, and it just hurts just a little bit more. And I will say this, I think when I was writing my season prediction, I said something along the lines of, until they prove otherwise, Penn State will lose to Ohio State. They'll lose to some other team. And I actually mentioned Illinois by name. But still, watching that disaster did not hurt any less, because back in August, I had said, well, it might be Illinois this year. So, I know I've gone completely off topic now, but still looking at the season and looking at how close they were on some of these games, right? Like how close they were to avoiding the total collapse against Iowa, how close they were to avoiding overtime altogether versus Illinois, right? Like if I think it was Joey Porter Jr., if he or maybe it was Jaquan Brisker, one of the two.
It was Brisker that dropped INT, yeah.
If he doesn't drop that interception, we're not even talking about that disaster. If John Lovett is like half an inch inside, we're talking about potentially the worst case scenario being a 3-way tie and Penn State goes to the championship game, right? If this, whatever that was, with the fake field goal thing, right? We're still talking about a potential 10-win season. So Penn State is close, and who knows what will happen next season. But it still hurts. It still sucks, but at least we're not Nebraska.
That's true. You know what? At least we're not Nebraska. I'm going to ride that the rest of the season. At least we're not Nebraska. But yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Like coming into the season, I predicted 9-3. And the biggest reason I predicted 9-3 because Sean Clifford was such a wild card that I thought this team had 10-win talent, but I wasn't sure what in the world they were going to get out of the quarterback. And that's part of what makes this so frustrating on my end is what we saw through the first 5 games and that first half against Iowa. That Sean Clifford, had you told me before the season they were going to get that Sean Clifford, I definitely would have predicted 9 or 10 wins, excuse me. And, like you said, you predict one thing before the season And you got to keep that in mind. But as the season progresses and expectations change, that's where it definitely gets frustrating because, whenever they're beating Iowa 17-3 late in the second quarter and appear to be well on their way to 6-0, being ranked number 2 in the country, nobody out there is going to sit there and still tell you, hey, this is an 8 or 9 win team. And they were right for not feeling that way. Like, I remember our Black Shoe Diaries group chat and the Slack channel in the closing minutes, the first half against Iowa, we were all very confident that Penn State may have been the best team in the Big Ten at that point. And things have just completely unraveled since then. What makes it so frustrating is it was the injury, at least for me, is that it was the injury thing. And that's when you truly sit here and wonder, what if? If Clifford never gets hurt and they lose these games, fine, they weren't good enough. But we saw when he was healthy, they were good enough. And even today, like you said, it's very clear he's still not 100%. There was a throw on their final drive of the first half where they wound up settling for a field goal to make it 7-6 at halftime. But he had John Lovett going down the middle of the field wide open, and Lovett probably walks into the end zone, and Cliff just he overthrew him. I don't know if he didn't play on his feet, if he couldn't because of the pain, whatever it was, but that's a throw that early in the season Cliff definitely makes. And if you're leading 10-7 at halftime, again, totally different game. There are a couple crossing routes, say, that could have gone for first downs, at least, if not bigger gains, where Cliff just missed the guy. He's not in, like you said, you got to give him all the credit in the world. Anyone who's watched Penn State the last 3 years will tell you Sean Clifford's one of the toughest players in the country. The dude has gone out there repeatedly, nowhere near 100%, and given the Nittany Lions all he's had. But, when you're not 100%, you can only do so much, especially against the defense caliber of Michigan's. And that's what we saw today. And that's what, for me, makes it such a frustrating season for Penn State, is it's a what-if season due to an injury to your quarterback. Like I said, if you come out and you lose to Iowa, you lose to Ohio State, to Michigan, to Illinois, and you're healthy, okay, because then you weren't talented enough, you weren't good enough, whatever it is. The talent's there on this team, and that's where the what-if becomes so frustrating, because if Sean Clifford just does not get hurt, who knows where they're at today included. Because like I said, there were a few throws today that could have gone for big gains, one that would have been an easy touchdown that Cliff didn't make, and it looked like he didn't make them, partially because of being hurt. Now, some of that could have been that Michigan pass rush was getting home, but at the same time, if you're playing at 100%, that pass rush doesn't affect you as much either. Like you said, anytime he would take a hit, you'd see him hunched over. You could tell he was hurting. If you're not hurting after taking hits, you're going to be more likely. It's human nature. It's easier to hang in that pocket and take that hit, move around and take a hit because you're not in pain. And just that still continues to be the biggest thing that plagues this team. And, there's 2 more regular season games in the bowl game left, and they can still finish this thing strong. Like you said, there's no reason they should lose to Rutgers. If they lose to Rutgers next week, then I don't even know what to say.
Then I will jump in the fire everyone.
Listen, and when you jump at that point, for the give a little insight on, I know Tim and I kind of talk about how when Tim and I are feeling optimistic, things are going good. For Ellie to ever feel pessimistic, things are a complete disaster at that point. But no, and even Michigan State. Michigan State's a team Penn State can beat. Michigan State's secondary has really struggled this year, and that's what Penn State does best. So, you can still come out. You can finish 8-4, finish the season with a victory over a ranked team in Michigan State, win your bowl game, get to 9 wins. Again, like you said, preseason, predicting 8 or 9 wins. If they can still get to that, you'll take that. And a big thing is, like you said, this recruiting class that's coming in, it has a lot of guys who not just being highly rated, but guys who should contribute early as well. I know we've talked a lot on the show about Drew Allard, the quarterback, but even a running back. We've talked about how much running back has struggled this year outside of Kevon Lee. They're bringing the number 1 running back in the country, Nick Singleton, who should contribute right away as well. So it's going to continue to not be a lack of talent moving forward. Penn State, as long as James Franklin's here, it's never going to be a lack of talent. It's going to be staying healthy. It's going to be avoiding some of the boneheaded coaching decisions that, to the credit of Franklin's staff, I think anyone who's watching this will agree he has grown leaps and bounds as a game day coach since he got here. He still has some head scratchers like today, but I'm the one who's completely off topic, ranting and raving, but it's the talent's going to be there. And I think the biggest thing for Penn State is just get to the finish line at this point. If you can win these last 2 games and win your bowl game, go 9-4, you still will gladly take that. You got to avoid complete disaster. Make sure you beat Rutgers at this point. I know James Franklin's all about the 1-0 mentality, and that's probably never been more true than it is right now because you absolutely cannot lose to Rutgers with everything else that has unfolded this season.
Yeah, and I think we've exhausted every possibility with this particular game, right? There really isn't much else to digest because,
really, like we said, it came down to
the defense did well.
Special teams, yeah, but that's been the story of the season. The defense has been awesome. You know, they pressured Cade McNamara all game. To McNamara's credit, he made some really good throws. Michigan made some tough contested catches. And the Nittany Lion defense, when they needed a turnover, they stepped up. They got that turnover. They put the offense in position to score a touchdown, and the offense didn't capitalize. The offense could hold the 3, and it came back to bite them. I mean, it's anyone who watches this game and faults Penn State's defense and faults Brent Pry, I would be concerned that either A, you're watching a different game, or something's wrong with you and you just don't get it, because the defense was terrific today. Pry continues to be terrific. I think I've said it all year. I think this is the best coaching job Brent Pry has done as Penn State's defense coordinator, which is saying something because he's had some really good seasons.
And I will say this, I think James Franklin's willingness to tap into the portal is going to be paramount in this particular offseason because we're going to need to plug a lot of holes on defense. And to their credit, right, they did exactly that. Derek Tangelo and Eddie Katie are proof positive that they can go out and do it. But I think the other benefit of this particular recruiting class is that, not to get too speculative here, but say Clifford comes back, there's going to be somebody behind him. There are going to be 2 somebodies behind him that can actually throw a football. not to be too harsh on the people on the current roster, right? But I have much more confidence in both Drew Alar and Pribula coming in than I do on the people who effectively could not see the field when Sean Clifford wasn't at 100%. So, like, if something were to happen, and I'm hoping that is not the case and we don't have to test that scenario, but if something were to happen next season and one of those 2 guys had to step in, I feel much more confident that Penn State would still be able to move the ball over what we have. And I'm, again, getting way off topic here, but like, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if one of those 2 guys is not with the team come the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility in the portal era. I personally am just going to continue to stick to the all sunshine and roses edition I've painted in my head, where Aller comes in, starts for 3 years, is awesome, goes to the pros, and still allows Pribula to take over as a redshirt sophomore at that point. So everybody's happy and everybody plays, and Penn State gets all the good quarterbacks. But no, like you said, if something does go haywire at quarterback next season, then they're going to be in a much better position. And, you know, I wouldn't totally rule out Sean Clifford coming back for a 6th year either. He certainly did not dismiss that at all this past week when meeting with the media, when he said he hasn't even thought if this is going to be his last game at Beaver Stadium yet or not. And I think Cliff could definitely use another year for his draft stock and everything. So I wouldn't rule that out. But no, like you said, today's game, I think things have been exhausted on our end. You know, the defense was awesome. The offense didn't finish drives. And that fake field goal, just debacle, disaster, chaos, calamity, whatever you want to call it. Those are the 3 big takeaways from this game and the 3 things that were most contributing to the outcome.
Indeed. And if we had some semblance of balance, right, things wouldn't need to be on Clifford so much. Because going back to what we were talking about being 100%, right, like, the other part about this is that Clifford actually scrambled and took off and run a couple of times today. But if he were feeling better, it's very likely that he takes off and run a couple of more times instead of taking the sacks that he did or throwing the ball away a couple of times. He just like didn't have anywhere to go and basically threw the ball where no one could catch it. It's very likely that a couple more of those times he runs, and the few times where he did and he got caught, he's very likely not getting caught and instead getting a first down. So I am definitely excited for the next few years. Now my dreams are red shirts and or maybe do all our backs up Clifford and pre-will arrest shirts. So things same result but different sequence of events. But yeah, I think this game came about just as everyone predicted. It was very close. A couple of plays made all of the difference. I actually predicted this exact same score, 21-17. I just happened to have the teams flipped. But, ultimately, this is football. A couple of inches here and there, one missed tackle here and there, one misdirected play here and there, and you have the difference, right? The difference between a 17-14 final versus a 21-17 final.
Yeah, absolutely. I came close to really nailing this prediction because I said 28-17 Michigan. And the only reason I said it'd be that high is that Michigan would have a late drive where they would score to ice it. And man, if Harbaugh just would have gone for it and said, no, I really would have looked like the smart one coming out of this. But no, I think unless you have anything else, that'll probably do it for this week. Rutgers next week. Like we said, that's a game the Nittany Lions should take care of business in. And if not, even Ellie's going to be setting the signals off at that point and sounding the sirens. That's when you really know we're in trouble. But no, if nothing else, thank you again for hopping on this week and covering for Tim. And Tim and I will be back next week to break down what will hopefully be a Nittany Lion victory over Rutgers with everybody.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.